We know that we've discussed at length the sin of David. I did want to just bring a few Gemaras, a few statements from the Talmud about this, about the story of David. One of them is from the Gemara in Shabbos. And the Gemara in Shabbos says that on page 30, the Gemara here brings a statement of David HaMelech, where David HaMelech says, it says, David said before Hashem, Rebbeinu Shalayla, Master of the universe, forgive me for that sin. And Hashem replied that you are forgiven. So David HaMelech, David then asks Hashem, he says, and this is a verse in Tehillim, Aseh imi ois l'toiva, display for me a sign for good, so that my enemies may see it and be ashamed, which means David HaMelech had many enemies that were so happy when the story came out that David had sinned. They were so happy that they had this way of, they could now tease David about his terrible sin. And so David asked Hashem for forgiveness, and Hashem said, you are forgiven. And then David asks, so display for me a sign in my lifetime. Aseh imi ois, display for me for a sign, l'toiva, for good, that v'yiru Sinai, that my enemies will see and be embarrassed. So Hashem said, during your lifetime, I will not let it be known publicly that I have forgiven you. However, I shall make it known in the lifetime of your son Solomon. And then it talks about a story of the building of the Beis Amigdush. It says when Solomon built the Beis Amigdush, he wanted to bring the ark into the Holy of Holies. And the gates clung to each other and could not be opened. And the story was that the ark was actually 10 amos wide, and the temple doorway was 10 amos wide, and the people needed to fit through the doorway, stand on its sides to carry it. And so ultimately, it just wouldn't work. And Shlomo HaMelech, Solomon, who's David's son, he became embarrassed and began to daven. And what happened was Shlomo HaMelech recited 24 songs of prayer, and Renana, Techina, Tefillah. There are different expressions of prayer. And David HaMelech said, Shlomo HaMelech said these 24 songs of prayer, or according to some opinions, it means he said the first 24 Psalms of the book of Psalms, and there was no answer. In other words, the Hashem didn't answer him, and the gates did not open. Then he said, the 24th Psalm. In the 24th Psalm, he says, "Su'u sha'arim rashechem, raise up your heads, O gates, and be uplifted, and you everlasting entrances, so that the King of glory may enter." For those that just arrived, I'm reading from the Gemara Shabbos on page 30, the story of David HaMelech, how he wanted that everyone should know that he's forgiven, and Hashem said, "I will let it be known in the days of Shlomo HaMelech, in your son's days. I am not going to let people. I'm not revealing it right now." And and the story of Shlomo HaMelech is that Shlomo HaMelech built a Beis Hamikdash, and he's trying to get the Aron into the Beis Hamikdash, and it won't fit. And so he says, "Raise up your heads, O gates, and be uplifted, you everlasting entrances, so that the King of Glory may enter." So the gates, they wanted to swallow him. It says, they said, "Who is the King of Glory?" In other words, is it yourself? So Shlomo HaMelech said, "No, it's Hashem Izos v'Gibor, Hashem, the mighty and strong one." So they went back and said, I'm sorry. So Shlomo HaMelech said, "It's Hashem, the mighty and strong, Hashem Izos v'Gibor, the mighty and strong God." And then he asked again, "Su'u sharam rashechem, raise up your heads, O gates, and raise up you everlasting entrances, so that the King of Glory may enter." And who is this King of Glory? Hashem Tzivakos. It's Hashem, master of the King of of hosts, who is King of Glory forever. Melech HaKavod Selah. And still, the gates wouldn't open. And then he said, "Hashem Elokim, al tashev pnei mashichecha." Don't turn your face away from your anointed one. And remember lechaste David avdecha. This is a verse from the book of Divrei Hayamim. Zachar lechaste David avdecha. Remember the kindnesses. Remember the chesed of David. Not the it means like the kindnesses and the piety of David, your servant. And immediately he was answered, the gates opened. And at that moment, the faces of David's enemies turned dark with humiliation, like the bottom of a pot that was blackened by fire. So that is the ultimate story over here, the climax of the story of how David HaMelech's enemies, when when this story broke, they were thrilled. They were so excited that we see who David really is. And then Hashem sort of wanted it to be that way, it seems, so that in the end, the embarrassment will really be on them, because in the end, they'll see the Beis Hamikdash wouldn't be built if not for David. And only in the merit of David was the ark able to enter the Beis Hamikdash. That's a Gemara in Shabbos. That's number one. Then comes another. Ben, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, it's a little early for talking about Shlomo building the Beit Amigdash in Yud Bet. Perek Yud Bet. He's just being born.
Yeah, I'm bringing that in because we're talking about the fact that David HaMelech was forgiven for his sin, but it wasn't revealed
after his death.
There were numerous things, numerous punishments, but it wasn't. But mainly after he was forgiven, after he said, "I sinned." That really was the main forgiveness. Oh, but the fact is that Hashem didn't reveal the fact that he was forgiven until the time of Shlomo HaMelech. And that's the story that I just quoted for you from the Gemara Shabbos. And then there's a Gemara in Yuma. The Gemara here, it talks about David HaMelech's another punishment that David HaMelech had, and the Gemara here mentions. It says Amar Rab Yehuda, Amar Rav, and the name of Rav says that 6 months David HaMelech had tsaras. He fell sick with leprosy, and the Sanhedrin separated from him, and the Shechina, the divine presence, separated from him, as it says, Yashuvu li yireyecha v'yoidei eidosecha Shibali Sasan Yeshecha, return to me the joy of your salvation. And what David HaMelech was saying, two things. Number one, the Sanhedrin should return to him. Yeshuvuli Yireyecha, those that fear you should return to me. and yoidei eidosecha, those that know your statutes should return to me, which is implying that they separated from David. And the second thing is, Hashivali sasoin yeshecha, return to me the joy of your salvation, which is referring to the Shekhinah, the divine presence. And so David wanted to be able to get back. He was 6 months with this saras, this leprosy, and everyone stayed away from him, and the Shekhinah stayed away. And so this is another punishment that it doesn't like clearly spell out in the in the text that we are reading in Shmuel Beis, but it mentions it based on these verses in Tehillim. So you see from the Tehillim, in other words, there's other parts of the story that he was punished. In addition to these punishments, he also fell sick with saras, with leprosy, and so that's another part of the story that's mentioned in the Gemara that it doesn't mention in the actual wording in the it's in the Gemara sees it hinted to from psukim, from verses in the Tehillim, but it doesn't say it in the book of Shmuel Beis. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring is Ezra had asked yesterday, what's the law with a king who is in mourning? And so in the Rambam, he brings down that a king is obligated in all laws of Avelus and all laws of mourning. So chapter 7, law 7, paragraph 7, in the Rambam in the laws of mourning. He says a king is obligated in all the laws of mourning. The only thing he doesn't do is he doesn't leave his palace for a funeral, but nor does he comfort mourners. He doesn't leave for his relatives. He doesn't leave for funerals of others, and he doesn't comfort mourners. And the only reason he went to Avner's funeral is to show that he did not kill, that Avner was not killed because he wanted him to be killed. And that's also connected to our what we learned together, that we know that Avner was murdered, and David HaMelech was not behind it. And David specifically, even though he's not supposed to go to a funeral, he went to that funeral because he needed to unite the Jewish kingdom, and he wanted to make it very clear that he was not behind the killing of Avner. And so the laws of mourning do apply. Now, Mordechai had mentioned yesterday about something to do with the way the king, that there is some law about a king when he, how he sits during his Shiva, during his mourning. And that's also brought down, but it seems like it's really a law regarding the subjects, what they do. In other words, that law emphasizes that the king sits on a low stool, and the people who come to comfort him, they sit on the floor. And so, in other words, it's more of an emphasis on the law, what the other people do, than the king himself. In other words, the king, there is one difference, that a regular person could sit on the floor also when they're mourning, but a king sits on like a low stool. So, but that's part of Shiva. In other words, it's not like against the rules of mourning. It's the main difference is that the other people around him, that they sit on the floor. This is the Rambam also brings that in the laws of kings. He brings that law that you quoted.
Maybe he's trying to show that the people still have to sit lower than the king.
Yeah, they do. It's emphasizing that, but it doesn't mean that the king has any less laws of mourning during Shiva. Here it says, even if one of his close relatives dies, this is in the laws of kings, chapter 2. He may not leave his palace. When he has served the meal of comfort, the entire nation should sit on the ground, and he should sit on a low couch.
Yeah.
So, if he enters a temple courtyard, and he is of David's descendants, that's another law. I don't know if that's applicable to mourning. So the law of mourning is That's the only law, which basically means that when they have that meal, after the funeral, they have a meal called Su'udas Havra. So the people come to it's called the meal of comfort, and when they come for that, they come and sit on the ground, and he sits on a low couch. So that's basically the law of a king with regard to mourning. So that really that takes us back to the story of David HaMelech's son died from being sick, which was a punishment to David. And we find, and as I was mentioning yesterday, we find that David HaMelech went right to take a shower and to vayirchatz, vayosech. He anointed himself with oil and things, and he changed his clothes, and then he went to prostrate himself before Hashem. And he went to the house of Hashem, and he bowed down. And then he went to his house, and he wanted to eat a meal. And we spoke about it, how the people, all of his servants were baffled at how he, at his actions.
He fasted before he died.
Fasted before, and now he's wants to eat. Like he has they were surprised he even has an appetite, I guess. And anyway, the point that we made before was that why wasn't he sitting Shiva? Why was he taking a shower? And because now what is interesting here, something very interesting you find here when it comes to Jewish law and deriving Jewish laws from the verses. On the one hand, the understanding of the commentaries here is that David did not need to sit Shiva. That's the simple understanding. Why not? Because the child maybe was not a viable child. He was not born after a full 9 months, and therefore he didn't need to sit Shiva. There is an understanding that maybe he did need to sit Shiva, but the funeral didn't take place yet, and therefore, because the funeral didn't take place yet, he was allowed to take the shower. So that's an alternative way of understanding it. But the interesting thing is that the Talmud says something totally different. The Talmud says that that an avel, a mourner, is not allowed to have relations with his wife. And it sees that in verse 24, where it says, David comforted his wife and he came to her, which means he had relations with her. Now, what that means is that the Gemara says that the time of nichum, of comfort, is really after the time of mourning. Meaning that when it says this verse, why does it say this verse that he comforted her and he was with her? It's emphasizing that during the time of mourning, you're not allowed to be together. What do you mean you're not allowed to be during the time of mourning? There was no Shiva. Right? If according to the explanation I just gave, that he didn't have to sit Shiva. So what does the Gemara mean that David waited till after the Shiva until the time of Nichum? Nichum means consolation. He waited till that time, and you see from here that a mourner during Shiva is not allowed to have relations with their spouse. How do you see that from here? Here, there was no mourning in the first place. The child was not a viable child. So you see from here that what the Gemara is saying is that it's a hint from here. It's not a actual source. In other words, it could be David did not need to sit Shiva, but you still see a hint, nevertheless, that the fact is that during the time of Shiva, a person would not be allowed to have relations, and it's only after the Shiva was over that David was able to have relations with Bathsheba, and they ended up she got pregnant, and she gave birth to another child number 2. So that is the story here of the Shiva that I started yesterday, and I just wanted to conclude. Yes, Ben.
What I saw here is the difference to me was that Natan, the prophet, warned him already that the child will pay for his sin. He told him the child is going to die. He still tried to save the child by fasting, but he knew it's not going to help. But then anyhow, he tried his best. And the minute it didn't work, he says, okay, God did what he had to do, what he told me he's going to do. And he showered and ate and,
Right. So in other words, the contradiction here is not so much of a it's not so surprising, you're saying. The fact that he prayed as much as he could, it fits with the understanding that we always know that God could always retract from a bad decree. God could take it, could retract, just like we find with Nineveh. Right?
Yeah, but he did.
They were going to be destroyed, and they did repented, right? Yeah. And God didn't give the punishment. So so even if there's a decree and a punishment is planned, there is a potential to have it retracted, and Hashem could take it back. Yeah. The words of Hashem can be retracted if it's negative. So in any event, I'm not exactly sure what verse we're up to, so let's just start verse 21. His servant said to him, "What is this that you are doing? For the living baby you fasted and wept, and when the baby died you got up and ate a meal." In verse 22, he said, "While the baby was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I thought, who knows, perhaps Hashem will show me favor and the baby will live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I will be going to him, but he will not return to me." Okay, so now comes the next part of this, and that's David. It says David comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he came to her and lay with her, and she gave birth to a boy and called him Solomon. Hashem loved him. He sent word through Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Yedidah because of Hashem. So here we have David impregnates Bathsheba second time, and they have a child. The child's name is Shlema, and it's interesting because in the Hebrew there's Vayikra and Vatikra. The actual word that it says is Vayikra, but it's supposed to be read Vatikra, which the difference is if it's a male or a female. Who called his name Shlema? Did he call his name Shlema, or did she call his name Shlema? So in the book of Divrei Hayamim, it mentions that Hashem said that Hashem called him Shlema, and the reason because of shalom and peace and so on will be in his days and so on. But the verse mentions that she called him Shlema, and so that's the Kri and the Ksiv, that Bathsheba also called him Shlema, and then it says that he sent word through Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Yedidah because of Hashem. Now, who called his name Yedidah? Yedidah means my very close friend. Like it says about Benjamin, Yedid Hashem, Binyamin Amar, Yedid Hashem, Yishkain Laveta Chalav, that a very close friend, and that's Yedidah. And now Hashem loved him. Now, so that is also an interesting point. It says Hashem loved him. He sent his word through Nathan the prophet, and he called his name Yedidah because of Hashem. So there's a question of how to exactly read these words. The one way of reading it is Hashem loved him. He sent word through Nathan the prophet, meaning that Nathan the prophet told them that Hashem loves this child. The previous child, Hashem was angry at you, David, but this child, Hashem loves. And or another way of reading it is he sent word through Nathan the prophet that Hashem called his name. He called his name Yedidah because of Hashem. And in other words, the prophet told him what Hashem said. So one way of understanding it is that Hashem called his name Yedidah, and in other words, my close friend. And another way of reading it is that David called his name Yedidyah, and what it says that he sent word through Nathan the prophet is that Hashem loves him. That previous sentence, Hashem loves him, it goes together. And
but that's the meaning of Yedidyah. Yedidyah is a friend of Hashem.
Right.
The Yud Hey is Hashem. So
for sure. But it's a question of who made up this name, because we know Hashem also called him Shlomo.
I don't think anybody called him Yedidyah afterwards.
Vayikra es Shema Yedidyah.
Yeah, but I'm saying, usually the name Shlomo stuck, and Yedidyah, maybe they mentioned it somewhere, I don't know.
Well, it's right here. He called his name Yedidyah.
Yeah,
I don't know how often. You're saying he probably didn't use it. It was probably not the regular name. We don't know. Yeah, at least in the books, it doesn't seem to use it. But we don't know how. We don't know what the what his parents called him. How often they called him by his name. But in any event, so that's this story, and then it continues and it says Vayilochem Yoav Barabbas b'nei Ammon. So Yoav now fought Rabbah of the children of Ammon. In other words, a city. This city, Rabbah, from the children of Ammon, and he captured the royal city, which means that there really were two cities next to each other. One was the royal city, and they were both fortified. The royal city was where the king in his palace was, and the next city was where the people lived. And the city of Rabbah, the one with the palace, that was where the water. That was there was also the source of the water was there, and that was much harder to. That where the palace was, of course, was much more fortified. And Yoav fought against it, and he captured that city, that royal city. Yoav sent messengers to David saying, "I fought against Rabbah, have even captured the city of water." So he's got the source of the water. He's got the hard. He captured the harder part of this nation, which is the outer city, which was the harder part to capture, and that's where the city of, and that includes the city of water. And now now he said, you gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and capture it, lest I capture the city myself, my name will be attached to it. Which means that Yoav wanted to honor David and say, why don't you just finish it off? I already did all the hard work. I'm going to let you finish it off. So we're in verse 29 now. And so David gathered together all the people and he went to Rabbah. He battled it and captured it. So David did what he sort of fixed up what he didn't do originally, because Uriah, the person who he had killed, who he arranged to have killed in war, he sort of insulted David by saying, I'm not going to go and be with my wife. Everyone else is fighting this war. And he was implying like you just hung out in your palace. We're fighting a war. The Jewish people are in a war. And so he insulted David originally, and that was one of the reasons he was deserving of the death penalty. And David was not wrong necessarily for killing him. He was wrong for the way he did it. But so now David gathers everyone together and he goes to Rabbah and he's going to fight. And he removed the king's crown from his head, and it weighed a talent of gold and had a precious stone, and it remained over David's head. Now, this is an interesting thing. It mentions that he removed the king's crown, but it's unclear if it's actually the king's crown or the idol Moilech, because both of them have the same word. Moilech and Malcolm. Malcolm means their king, and Moilech also is the term for their idol. So it's possible that it was their idol's crown, and possibly the reason why you would want to learn that way is, you know how much it weighed? It weighed over 100 pounds. It weighed a talent of gold, and weighing a talent of gold is not something you necessarily want to wear. Something that's over 100 pounds. So it could be the idol. The idol was made out of whatever it was made out of. That could handle 100 pounds. But the Gemara deals with this about the fact that how did David wear this? But I don't want to take any more time, so we'll conclude this chapter Metz Hashem next week. I want to give over the